Senator from Arizona.
I stand here today as the border crisis is devastating my state. Just last week, Nogales officers seized 2.1 million fentanyl pills at a port of entry. Just last week, Border Patrol agents recovered in the Tucson desert enough fentanyl to kill 340,000 Americans. Just last week, nearly 14,000 migrants crossed into Arizona. Many of them are military-age men coming from all across the globe. Our broken border system is a national security crisis. Last September, when my Republican colleagues demanded with a clear and unified voice that border security must be included in Congress's national security package, I wholeheartedly agreed. Finally, it seemed, we had the opportunity to solve the nightmare my state has lived for over 40 years. So I got to work. My Republican colleagues chose Senator James Lankford, my partner, on the Homeland Security Border Management Subcommittee. We have worked together for over 5 years on strong border policy. Senator Lankford has joined me at the Arizona border to see the crisis firsthand. Senator Lankford is an incredibly smart, earnest, conservative lawmaker. I know he was chosen by his conference because of his expertise and knowledge of border security policy and his reputation as a serious, conservative lawmaker who cares deeply about getting policy right. As we started the negotiations, Senator Lankford laid out 4 policy pillars the Republican conference needed to secure the border. Number 1, asylum. Raise the asylum standard and close the loopholes so cartels and economic migrants can no longer exploit the system. Number 2, safe third country. Ensure that people who have lived safely in another country don't backlog our system because they do not qualify for asylum. Number 3, close the border. Create a Title 42-like authority to shut down the border when our system is backlogged and overwhelmed. Number 4, parole. Stop the administration from giving migrants at the border a free pass into our country. Over the course of nearly 5 months, we worked every single day, navigating intricate and difficult policy decisions to meet these 4 pillars. And when we hit bumps, I reminded everyone at the table about what was happening on the ground at my border, what real life looks like in Arizona, because I knew that those 4 key pillars were necessary to secure the border and solve the crisis. You know, that's why just yesterday, when endorsing our bill, Yuma Mayor Doug Nichols said, "Thank you for incorporating many of the specific issues that border leaders have asked to be addressed." So together with Senators Lankford and Murphy and our incredibly talented staffs, including my staff director on the Border Management Subcommittee, Anthony Papian, who's here today, we worked through weekends and through holidays to get these policies right. Senator Murphy, Senator Lankford, and I, we all negotiated in good faith. We delivered. We produced a bill many thought impossible. Our bill overhauls the broken system. It stops the misuse of parole, and it closes the border during surges, ensuring the quick detention and deportation of migrants who don't have a legal right to be here. We end catch and release. We add more detention beds. We increase deportation flights. We quickly decide asylum claims. We put Border Patrol back in the desert, catching the bad guys and the drugs. And that's why the National Border Patrol Council endorses our bill, not H.R. 2. We produced a bill that finally, after decades of all talk and no action, secures the border and solves the border crisis. Our bill was ready for prime time. We were ready to bring the bill to the floor, open it up for debate and amendments, you know how the Senate is supposed to work, and then pass the bill. But less than 24 hours after we released the bill, my Republican colleagues changed their minds. Turns out they want all talk and no action. It turns out border security is not actually a risk to our national security. It's just a talking point for the election. After all of their cable news appearances, after all those campaign photo ops in the desert, after all those trips to the border, this crisis isn't actually much of a crisis after all. Sunday morning, there was a real crisis at the border. Monday morning, that crisis magically disappeared. Well, guess what, guys? The crisis is real. It's real in Arizona. On Sunday, the day we released our bill, over 6,000 migrants crossed the border. On Monday, the day this body decided the border crisis was no longer a crisis, over 6,500 migrants crossed the border. And yesterday, the day my Republican conference members said that we are not going to pass a border bill, the day my colleagues said no, nearly 7,000 migrants crossed the border. The Border Emergency Authority in our border bill would have shut the border down, literally, every single day this year. Now, I've been sharing the facts of our bill to anyone who would listen. I've refuted the lie that says our bill allows 5,000 migrants to enter the country every day. In fact, our bill stops those migrants from coming into the country every day. Meanwhile, by killing our bill, we have no Title 42-like authority to shut down the border. So 5,000, 6,000, 7,000, 10,000, or even 14,000 migrants can cross into our country every single day. Make no mistake, a vote against this bill is a vote for the status quo. It is a vote for continued chaos at our border. Our current system lets migrants into the country with nothing but a piece of paper, a notice to appear, for a court date years into the future, and no accountability structure to ensure they actually show up. In Arizona, this broken system is commonly called catch and release. It's been happening for years. Our bill ends catch and release, but when this bill fails, catch and release will continue every single day. Some people say the president has all the authority he needs to secure the border. Then tell me why Arizona has lived the nightmare of our border crisis for over 40 years, and through the past 5 administrations, Republican and Democrat. Before COVID, the last administration tried to shut down the border. The court stopped it. After COVID, the court struck down Title 42. It is clear we need a law. I've heard from some that the only solution is the House Republican bill, H.R. 2. To them, I'd point out that our bill, unlike H.R. 2, actually includes penalties for those who try to cross the border when it's shut down, creating a 1-year bar for anyone who tries to cross twice. H.R. 2, no consequences. H.R. 2 continues the current flawed policy that allows migrants to get work permits without any asylum interview. Our bill ends that. And that's why the conservative Wall Street Journal editorial board called our bill the most restrictive migrant legislation in decades. We make sure that only those actually fleeing violence and persecution can stay here and work after they pass a new, faster, tougher screening. And if someone doesn't finish the asylum process, their work permit gets taken away. H.R. 2, silent. H.R. 2 doesn't even fund new detention beds, guys. H.R. 2, another example of all talk and no action. So if you want to spend the border crisis for your own political agendas, go right ahead. If you want to continue to use the southern border as a backdrop for your political campaign, that's fine. Good luck to you. But I have a very clear message for anyone using the southern border for staged political events. Don't come to Arizona. Take your political theater to Texas. Do not bring it to my state. Because in Arizona, we're serious. We don't have time for your political games. We are not interested in you posing for the cameras. In Arizona, we are busy. Just ask Cochise County ranchers David and Tina Thompson. They live in the reality of our broken border every time that migrants attempt to break into their home. Ask Bisbee City Council member Leslie Johns, who had to open the doors of the town city council building and clear out the chambers for migrants to sleep on the floor after they were released into a tiny town with no shelter and just one bus stop. Or ask Yuma farmer John Bolts, who does his best to manage his farm despite the lettuce crops constantly trampled by migrants crossing his produce fields. Or ask Bernadette Nez, the manager of Why Not Travel convenience store in Y, Arizona, who lost thousands of dollars every day before Christmas while the Lukeville port of entry was closed. Or ask Sierra Vista Mayor Clea McCaw, who lays in bed at night scared that his teenage daughter could die in one of the daily, deadly, high-speed chases of teenagers smuggling drugs and people from the border up to Phoenix and next into your state. Or ask Bisbee Mayor Ken Budge, who is pleading with each and every one of you to understand how your political games hurt border towns like his. As he said yesterday, I am saddened after all these months. Now some senators have second thoughts about this from both parties. I would like to ask any of them to reverse their roles and trade places with me, how they would like to live in my home as a helicopter circled my home at 6:30 in the morning for about an hour, as was the case today. This is life in my border state. This is Arizona. Earlier this week, it was noted that while facts on the border haven't changed, the politics in the country have changed. I guess that's it. The politics changed. 3 weeks ago, everyone wanted to solve the border crisis. Yesterday, no one did. For 4 months, we were stymied on action to support our allies and stand up to Putin's illegal war. For 4 months, we've been unable to move forward, unable to defend democracy overseas because of the urgent need to secure our border. And then suddenly, in the last 48 hours, the border no longer matters. Some in this chamber say, let's just drop it. Hey, let's wait for the election. Let's sort this out in the next Congress. Let's move on. Arizona can't move on. You here can decide this crisis is over. But the crisis is still real in my state, and it will be tomorrow, and the next day, and the next day. You know, I usually end my speeches by calling on the better angels of our nature. When we work together, we can solve problems. We did that here. And you decided no. You decided you don't even want to debate it. You don't want to amend it. You don't want to tackle the problem. Partisanship won. The Senate has failed Arizona. Shameful. I yield back. Probably useful just to take a couple of moments and do a quick refresher on how Senate process and procedure works. So in the United States Senate, when a bill is introduced and when it comes to the floor, we have to do what's called a motion to proceed. And the motion to proceed, and the motion to invoke cloture on the motion to proceed, is a 60-vote threshold in the United States Senate. The 60-vote threshold, of course, is the filibuster. Now, folks in this body might remember how deeply I care about the filibuster, because it requires comity, it requires compromise, and it requires individuals of different parties to work together to solve problems. And often, it has been an object of contention in this body. But I support the filibuster because I believe it requires us to work together to solve problems, hear everyone's ideas, and incorporate them as we move forward on legislation. But of course, before you can actually amend a piece of legislation on the Senate floor, you first must pass the motion to invoke cloture. We held that vote yesterday at 1:59 p.m. I've got the copy of the roll call vote right here in front of me. And unfortunately, there were only 49 senators who voted yes to move forward on yesterday's package. There were 50 senators who voted no to move forward on the package. And of course, what the motion to invoke cloture was on the shell of the bill. The substitute that would be filed is this bill right here. This bill is 370 pages long. Most of this legislation is the border bill, which we spent over 4 months negotiating in a bipartisan way. I was very grateful that Senator Graham's team and Senator Graham himself were integral parts of that conversation. So, this bill is subject to debate and subject to amendment, but only after a motion to invoke cloture is passed, which requires 60 votes. Now, my good friend from South Carolina indicated that he would like to offer some amendments. Some of the ideas that he was discussing are ideas that I very much support. I would look forward to debating and possibly even supporting one or more of his amendments. But alas, we are unable to consider those amendments because yesterday the Senate chose to vote no on the motion to invoke cloture to move forward on this legislation. Therefore, we are not able to amend or debate this bill. The Senate later moved forward with a piece of legislation very similar to this, but missing the entire border section. So we are now in a period of waiting until our next vote to invoke another cloture, in which potentially, if unanimous consent occurs in this body, we could consider additional amendments. However, it could be more difficult to consider some of those border-related amendments, since the package now does not include any of the border language that we carefully negotiated over the last 4.5 months. So, Mr. President, members of the Senate, folks who are listening, just to be clear, it seemed clear to me, and I think to everyone in the United States Senate, that had we passed this motion to invoke cloture yesterday with 60+ votes, we would be currently debating, offering, and voting on amendments to the border provisions of the bill that was drafted. And each of those amendments would have been germane, which means they would have been voted at a 51-vote threshold, a simple majority to move forward. Alas, because this body chose not to invoke cloture, we have moved on to a different piece of legislation, one that does not include the border components. So while there may be amendments offered at some point over the next several days, it will be a very different debate than the amendments that would be offered before. And I know that my friend from South Carolina is currently drafting an amendment, which I appreciate. The amendment that he is drafting for current discussion would have to incorporate the entirety of the border bill package with some minor changes to the language that we drafted and voted on yesterday in order to consider his amendment. So I would suggest that perhaps if we had wanted to have a robust debate and open this to an open amendment process, the time to do that would have been yesterday at 1:59 p.m. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield.
So let's sort of a little overview of where we're at here. Everything my colleagues on the Democratic side said about helping Ukraine makes perfect sense to me. I think we need to help Ukraine. I thought it was a really bad idea to get out of Iraq in 2011. I issued a statement about our withdrawal in 2011. I said, I respectfully disagree with President Obama. I feel all we have worked for, fought for, sacrificed for is very much in jeopardy by today's announcement. Hope I am wrong and the President is right, but I fear this decision has set in motion events that will come back to haunt our country. The ISIS was not the JV team. A lot of people were slaughtered throughout the planet because of that ill-advised decision. So we got out of Afghanistan. President Biden chose to do that. I've got a statement here I'll put in the record. I was very clear that if we get out of Afghanistan, pull all the troops, that there will be a reemergence of al-Qaeda and ISIS, and that there will be great major upheaval as this decision by President Biden is a disaster in the making. So a lot of Republicans agree with those two things. to my Republican colleagues, if we pull the plug on Ukraine, it's going to be worse than Afghanistan. The idea of pulling the plug on Ukraine and it will not affect our national security is a fantasy. It was clear to me that getting out of Iraq in 2011 was too soon and would lead to the rise of radical Islamic terrorists. They literally took over half the country, killed people in Paris and here and everywhere else. Now we're back in Iraq. Should never got out in the first place. The bottom line about Afghanistan, I know it was a long slog and people wanted out, but the Taliban took over within weeks, and the Taliban being in charge of Afghanistan led to other people in the world thinking, hey, America's weak, now's the time to pounce. So in 2021, we withdraw from Afghanistan, the Taliban take over. 2022, Russia invades Ukraine. That's been a complete disaster. 2023, Hamas attacks Israel, killing more Jewish people than any time since the Holocaust. 2024, Iranian proxies are killing American soldiers, and they're running wild throughout the world. Other than that, everything is pretty good. Now, having said all that, my point is I want to help Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. I really do. I think it's in our national security interest to do all the above. But I've also said from like day one, I want to help other countries, but we got to help our country first. And what I mean by that? I mean that the border is not just broken, it is a complete nightmare. It's a national security disaster in the making. 7 million people have come across the border illegally. A lot of people on the terrorist watch list. So it has been a nightmare. And we tried to sit down in a bipartisan way. Senator Murphy, Sinema, Lankford, and others sat down to come up with a bipartisan proposal that I thought did a pretty good job in many ways. However, having said that, I didn't think it was enough. I was hoping to be able to build on what they did, but here's where we're at. The House declared it insufficient. The Republican...
Would the senator yield to a question?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Senator, I was just listening carefully to your speech, and you mentioned that you thought the bill that we had drafted and introduced yesterday was a good start, but not enough. I'm wondering if you would remind us how you voted yesterday on the motion to proceed to the bill that had the border package that we worked on together.
I'll be glad to. I voted no because I didn't see a process in place or willingness by my Democratic colleagues to allow me to express I think it could be better. See, in the Gang of Eight, you weren't here, but Senator McCain was, we worked really hard. Senator Bennett's been involved in all this stuff in 2013. And we let the bill come to the floor, people amend it, and we spent days and weeks. So that's why I voted no. Because, I reclaim my time.
colleagues, would you address your comments to me?
So here's what I'm saying. This has been a half-ass effort to deal with border security. To the people in the House, no, I'm speaking, you can speak later. To the people in the House, we have not really tried hard to secure the border. We took a well-meaning product, people worked really hard. I applaud you and others for coming out with a product that I thought had a lot of good things in it, but not enough for me. So now I can't even vote. We've closed out the border debate, and you may give me a few amendments on Ukraine about the border. That's not the way it works around here. So
to a question?
No. To my House colleagues, you can do better than this. Don't send us back H.R. 2. It's not going anywhere. You know, you couldn't get all Republicans for H.R. 2. We lost one Republican and no Democrat. So this idea we've done enough on the border is BS. I am not done. I'm not going to help Ukraine until we first do a better job helping ourselves. I've given people involved credit for working hard to get a product, but the system in place now, take it or leave it. The reason I voted no is I didn't see any willingness by anybody to allow an amendment process where we could deal with the border issue. I'm getting an amendment on the Ukraine bill about border.
To a question?
No, that's asked backwards. We don't do it that way. During the Gang of Eight and other attempts, we had a robust amendment process, and let me tell you, I think there's things we can do to make it better. The 5,000-day encounter that kicks in an emergency authority to shut down the border, here's what the Border Council said. 5,000 encounters a day is a catastrophe. 1,000 encounters a day would be a substantial improvement. It is truly an emergency. I was hoping we could talk about that. Now, we may get a vote on that on the Ukraine bill. We have closed out a debate on the border.
Yield to a question.
Yes.
Thank you. Now, Senator Graham, I know you've been here quite a bit longer than me, but it is my understanding that in order to get to the portion of a bill where we offer amendments on the floor, we first have to pass the motion to proceed. Yep. And it is also my understanding that it was offered by leadership and the 3 sponsors of the border bill, which your team gratefully helped us create, that we would have an open amendment process. So could you help me understand why you voted against the motion to proceed
I'll be glad
before we were able to offer any amendments,
Yeah,
including your amendments?
Yes, I think the fix is in. I think people on our side and your side wanted to do the border thing as quick as they could so we could get to Ukraine. And I don't trust the system here to be able to allow us to have the debate that we had for the Gang of Eight bill. That's why I voted no, because I didn't see any willingness, and it proved to be correct, because now the Republican leadership has joined with the Democratic leadership to shut down debate on the border bill, throwing a few amendments on the Ukraine bill and saying, aren't you happy now? No, I am not happy. I am not happy. I meant it that I wanted to secure the border before I helped Ukraine. Everything you say about Ukraine is right. I was not kidding to our colleagues in the House. We've done a half-assed job here trying to secure the border. We shut this thing down. Unlike any other time I've been involved in immigration, I've taken a lot of hard votes. You've taken a lot of hard, you've been kicked around. I understand it. Senator Langford, I admire the hell out of him. I thought y'all produced a pretty good product, a really good product in some areas, but it wasn't enough. I want a cap on parole. Let me tell you why I want a cap on parole. During the Trump-Obama years, the average people paroled into the country was 5,600. In the last 2 years, President Biden's paroled over 800,000 people. So the parole was better, but we need a cap to stop the abuse. I'd like to have an amendment on whether or not we should cap parole at 10,000 per year, but I'm getting that on the Ukraine bill. So to my colleague from Arizona, no, no, no. This has not been a real effort to find border security in a bipartisan way. We took your product, take it or leave it. The reason I voted no to proceed is exactly been reaffirmed here. We stopped the process. We're jumping to Ukraine. We're going to do it this weekend, and it's going nowhere in the House.
Would the senator yield to a question?
To those of you who want to help Ukraine, you've made it harder. We're going to lose a handful of Republican votes over here because they felt they were shut out in the debate about how to secure the border.
Would the senator yield to a question?
Votes. No, please. We're going to lose votes over here. You don't have a snowball's chance in hell of getting it through the House because we took the border issue and we didn't address it the way it should have been. We closed it out. I could see the game being fixed. I am here as a proud supporter of Ukraine, telling you that you've hurt the cause of Ukraine by trying to shortchange a debate on the border. Your product was good, but I want to make it better. I've got a National Border Patrol Council letter about 3 things that would make it better. I'd like to introduce it in the record if I could.
Without objection.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to close this thing out. Here's what's going to happen. You may get this bill passed without any border, but it's going nowhere in the House. The House has made it crystal clear to get money for Ukraine and other foreign countries, we got to help our own. Our border is on fire, and I'll give you credit, Senator from Arizona. You've been trying to fix it. I appreciate what you've tried to do, but the system we've employed to my colleague from Arizona, is unlike any I've ever seen. That we're going to take a consequential moment in American history trying to secure a broken border and not even bring it to the floor for a real debate. And the reason I voted no to proceed is because I saw what was happening. Our people on this side have been obsessed with Ukraine to the point of ignoring our border. There are people who are going to vote no to Ukraine who've always believed that the border was an excuse to try to get Ukraine. I never believed that. Senator, yield to a question. So the bottom line is that this idea, because 41 of us vote no, you close out the border. How about setting down and reopening the border debate to have a robust debate like we did with the Gang of Eight? So the reason I voted no is I could see where this thing's going. The bill you produced, while I like parts of it, was dead in the House. I'm trying to find a way to make it better if that's possible. To President Trump, who said he just doesn't want to deal with this the next year. I want to deal with it now. We could be attacked tomorrow. I want to let people in South Carolina know I consider this a direct threat to the United States. I want to do something. I want to do it now. I don't want to wait till November.
Would the senator yield to a question?
Sure.
Thank you. Senator, are you aware that the only way to offer amendments on a bill being considered in the United States Senate is to first pass the motion to invoke cloture on the motion to proceed? The vote that we took yesterday at 1:59 p.m.
Right. Are you aware of the fact that people routinely vote not to proceed until they get some kind of understanding of what's coming next? And here's what came next. Not one effort to sit down and talk to the 41 of us. What would you like to change your vote? The fix is in. We're jumped right into Ukraine. We're going to do it this weekend. We did the minimum on the border when it comes to changing a bill that has many good qualities. So you're not convincing me I'm the problem. I've seen this. You have not. I've seen a debate on this floor with Senator Bennett where we got the crap kicked out of us for weeks. We gave everybody who didn't like what we did a chance to come down here and say their side of the story and kick us in the ass. That's the way the process works. We did not do that here, so you're losing votes on Ukraine. You're losing me in terms of trying to fix this problem because I can't tell our House colleagues that you should accept this product because we have not done what I think needs to be done to try to secure our border.
Will the senator yield to a question?
With that, I'll yield the floor. Thank you.
Senator from Arizona.
Mr. President, I stand here today yet again as the border crisis continues to devastate my state. On February 7th, I stood here angry that rank partisanship tanked the single most important piece of border security and immigration legislation produced in decades. As we all remember, last October, I joined with Senators James Lankford of Oklahoma and Chris Murphy of Connecticut to craft this legislation. We worked every single day for over 4 months, navigating difficult policy decisions, working carefully to get it right. After months of tireless negotiations, we delivered a strong product. We produced a bill many thought impossible. We ended catch and release. We added more detention beds. We increased deportation flights. We quickly decided asylum claims, and we put Border Patrol back in the field where they belong, securing the border, not stuck inside processing paperwork. Yet less than 24 hours after we released the bill, my Republican colleagues blocked it, despite the fact that this is the most restrictive migrant legislation in decades. My Democratic colleagues blamed Republican political theater for blocking action. So did I. They were right. I spoke here on the Senate floor twice in defense of our legislation. It turns out my Republican colleagues were all talk and no action. Today, though, my Democratic colleagues have chosen more political theater instead of real efforts to solve this crisis. All talk and no action goes both ways. Today, the Senate will hold a show vote whose sole purpose is to point the finger back at the other party. Yet another cynical political game. These games demonstrate exactly why Americans have lost faith in their elected leaders. A Congress bickering and fighting for power instead of solving problems and making progress, any kind of progress, for regular people. Today's vote is not an attempt to solve the problem or provide relief to Arizona border communities. Today's vote is to send a message. But Arizona doesn't need your message. Arizona needs your help. Arizona needs action. These games of tit for tat, caving to the political messaging game, force both parties further to the fringes and further away from real solutions. Today, the Senate is proving what many Americans already think about Congress, that senators come here for political games, not to deliver results. Today's vote won't deliver lasting results for Americans, but the impact of today's vote is actually worse than simply being a useless message, because this vote does send an important message, but it's a message to us as lawmakers. I've often asked my colleagues in the interest of our nation to step out of partisan boxes and work with me to find real solutions to real problems. We've done it time and time again. This time it didn't work. Nearly 4 months later, I'm still deeply disappointed that we didn't solve the border crisis for my state and for our country. But to use this failure as a political punching bag only punishes those who were courageous enough to do the hard work of finding compromise in the first place. So who will be courageous next time? Who will stand up and do the hard work? Who will take the risks? Who will say, yes, I'll help solve this big challenge our country faces? Why would anyone? We don't leave today with a political victory. No one wins. No one gets the higher ground. Instead, we're saying to each other, don't step out. Don't try to solve big problems. Stay in your partisan corner, yell some more, blame the other side. Today, yet again, the Senate has chosen politics. But my state is still suffering. And as I said on the floor back on February the 7th, if you want to spin the border crisis for your own political agendas, go right ahead. If you want to continue to use the southern border as a backdrop for your political campaign, that's fine. Good luck to you. But I have a very clear message for anyone using the southern border for staged political events. Don't come to Arizona for your political theater. Do not bring it to my state. In Arizona, we're serious. We don't have time for your political games. There are big challenges facing the Senate and our country, and evidently, this is not a Senate interested in solving those challenges. Americans deserve better. I yield the floor.